Hello everyone, Ben DeBono here. I have got 15 minutes to do this video in to finish up question 16 for us, so let's not waste any time. Here we are covering the last four articles of question 16. Whether God is truth. I'm willing to bet the answer is going to be yes. Whether there is only one truth according to which all things are true. Whether created truth is eternal, and whether truth is immutable. Alright, is God truth? Probably. Truth involves the intellect composing and dividing. In God, there is no composition or division. Augustine says truth is a likeness to a principle. In God, there is no likeness to a principle. If God is truth, he must be the cause of all truth, just as in being good, he is the cause of all goodness. It is true that people sin, and God is not the cause of this, therefore he is not truth. This is an interesting one, just to pause here at these objections, because I think that, the answer is blindingly obvious that we're going to come to the conclusion, according to Christian theology, that God is truth. But these are worthwhile objections. I mean, this isn't just silly stuff. So they're worth working through. They're worth thinking through a little bit. So it's one of those where don't just write it off as an obvious article you can skip just because the answer's obvious. It's still worth understanding what are the answers of Christian theology to those types of objections, given the scheme that we've established here. And John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Hard to get a better verse than that to give the answer from authority. Or at the argument. Truth is in the intellect according as it apprehends what a thing is, and in things as they are conformable to the intellect. Pretty much restating what we've already talked about in the first half of this question. In both cases, this is most true of God, since he is his intellect and is thus most apprehended by his intellect and most conformed to his intellect. So, for God, he understands himself perfectly, and he is his intellect, so the intellect is perfectly conformed to the thing he understands, and since he understands all the other things for himself, God is truth, right? And we could also, you could even base that on Article 3. We've already seen God as being itself. Well, truth and being are convertible terms. This one very likely can't be no, right? Okay, replies to the objections. Number one, God, if in God there is no composition, but in his active intellect he knows all things, even those that are complex. So making a distinction between God's essence and his acts, right? Which we'll get into more starting with question 19 in just a little bit. Reply to 2, God is like a principle to the extent that he is not dissimilar to his intellect. And then number 3, the one I think is probably the most obvious if you've been following along, that the truth of the statement people sin is in God. The fact that that is a true statement is in God, but that doesn't follow that he causes the sin. It just means that God apprehends the truth of that statement. Okay? So, really a confusion of ideas in that third objection. Okay, Article 6. Is there only one truth, according to which all things are true? Augustine says nothing is greater than the mind of man except God. Truth is greater than the mind of man. Therefore, God alone is truth. Anselm says that time is to temporal things as truth is to true things. There is only one time for many temporal things. Likewise, there is only one truth by which all things are true. But Psalm 11, verse 2, speaks of truths as plural. All right, if we speak of truth as being in things, then there is only one truth by which all things are true. But if we speak of truth as being in intellect, then there are many truths existing in many intellects. So this is kind of going back to Article 1. The truth is in things secondarily, but in the intellect primarily. And because of that, we would say that there is only one truth secondarily, but primarily there are many truths because there's truth in me and you and you and you and you. So now to a modern postmodernist, this might sound like a little odd because you're kind of expecting Aquinas to discuss, relativism here, but that's not really his point. I don't know for sure if he discusses those concepts later on, but here he's really just more speaking of truth as a general concept, not necessarily having our postmodern debates in mind. So, if he kind of goes against what we might expect him to say here, That's why he's not actually talking about um, truth in the way that those who might defend absolute truth in the postmodern era uh, would refer to that. Okay? All right, replies to the objections. Nothing subsisting is greater than the soul, but created truth in the intellect is greater than the soul, though it is not subsisting. So Augustine's referring to subsisting beings. And Anselm is correct regarding truth in things. That's easy enough. All right, we're moving right along. He's created truth eternal. Probably not, since it's created, but let's see. Well, Augustine says that nothing is more eternal than a circle or mathematics. These are created truths, therefore created truth is eternal. What is always is eternal. Universals are always, hence how they are universals. Truth is a universal, therefore truth is eternal. It is always true that what is true in the present is true in the future. These propositions are created truths, therefore they are eternal. Really interesting answer to that one when we get down to it. The truth of enunciables, which we've talked about before, and I'm not going to get into them right what that is right now, just propositions, is without beginning and end, therefore the truth of enunciables is true. Well, question 10 already proved that God alone is eternal. Yeah, eternal. That's an interesting word. So we just nip that guy right in the bud. All right. The truth of enunciables is the truth of the intellect, since enunciables reside in the intellect. No intellect but the divine intellect is eternal, therefore only truth in him is eternal, and all created truths are not eternal. That's kind of going to be the answer to the next one, too. Just FYI, that we make a distinction between the qualities of truth in God and the qualities of truth in our minds. And we can do that because of Article 6, where we said, because truth exists in the intellect, the truth that exists in my intellect is different than the truth that exists in God's intellect, even if they're the same truth from another point of view, right? This is a screwdriver, right? That truth is in my intellect. That truth is in your intellect. That truth is in God's intellect. From a certain perspective, that's the same truth. But Aquinas is making a distinction between the fact that that truth resides in my intellect and that truth resides in your intellect and that truth resides in God's intellect. We now have 3 different intellects and 3 different truths. So the truth of that statement in God's intellect is eternal. The truth in ours is not eternal. It is a created truth. Okay. And our objections answered. Number 1, the nature of circle and mathematics have eternity in the mind of God. Important distinction. Universals are independent of place and time, but still rely on an intellect. Therefore, they are not eternal unless the intellect is eternal. So again, in God, they'd be eternal. In us, they're not. What is now, meaning what is in the present, relies on the first cause in order to be in the future. Thus, the proposition is not eternal, but only the first cause. In other words, when we set up here, that a proposition that is true now is going to be true in the future, Aquinas is reminding us that if the first cause ceased to be, that wouldn't be the case. There would be no future for that proposition to be true in. So only the first cause is truly eternal, right? If the first cause stopped causing, any proposition that is true now would stop being true in the future because there would be no future for it to be true in. So it's not an eternal truth. And then enunciables rely on our created intellects and thus are not eternal. We could also add except as far as they exist in the mind of God. All right, flying right through. Is truth immutable? Let's find out. Augustine seems to imply truth is immutable, so there you have it. Whatever remains after every change is immutable. Truth remains after every change. Propositions do not change, even if the things they concern change, since they are always present in the divine mind. And the same thing is the cause of the same effect. The same thing causes the truth of any of these propositions. Socrates sits, will sit, or sat. Therefore, their truth is immutable, since one of these must always be true. This was my head-scratcher moment for this video. I didn't understand that really what he was getting at in that objection, though the answer is more understandable, so hopefully you did better than I did on that one, but I'm afraid I don't have much to explain there. Psalm 11, that same verse we saw up somewhere, in Article 6. speaks of truth as decaying. I believe that Aquinas quotes it as truth decays from the father to the children, or something like that. I'd be interested to see how modern translations render that and read it in context, but I didn't take the time to do so because I had 15 minutes, right? All right. Truth resides in the intellect. Again, coming back to that point. For truth to be immutable, there would have to be no change in the intellect involved. Therefore, only truth of the divine intellect is immutable, but all other truth is mutable. Like I said, pretty much the same logic for whether or not created truth is eternal. Exactly the same here. And once again, those of us who are in the postmodern era might expect Aquinas to say, true, no, of course truth is unchangeable, but that's not what he means. Okay? He's not addressing our problems. He lived 800 years ago, so very important concept, whether you're reading Aquinas, the Bible, or any other ancient document, to not impose a chronological arrogance that says you have to address my issues. These are ancient writers, and they're not going to address every last issue the way we would, because we have different times and all that. Okay? So, reply to one, and I think this is the first time I've quoted a reply in its entirety. Augustine is speaking of divine truth. Open and shut, nothing to explain there. Truth and being are convertible terms. Just as being can change, so can truth, except so far as it's the divine being. Propositions change over time as conditions change. And then pretty much the same answer to number 4. The truth of these propositions changes over time depending on the conditions they refer to. So the whole Socrates will sit or sat thing, I didn't quite understand. Fairly straightforward answer. All right, we did it. That was fast enough. I should record more often when I've got a time deadline. That will get me talking a little bit faster. Less jibber jabber, more efficient videos, and we move along that much faster. All right, question 17, which I believe is just called On Falsity. I don't know why I wrote it out as Falsity in God, since it's kind of absurd. Maybe I was reading something else that mislabeled it that. I'm going to blame someone else, because I don't think I would have come up with that myself. But that only has 4 articles, so we'll knock that one out in one video, and I'll be back in a couple days with that one. I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.